Right, so the insane, twisted minds of the Israeli settler movement are not without formal government backing now, it seems, as the dire Nahala movement, the hard-right settlers determined to settle Gaza, hold their conference, their rally, and they welcome members of the Israeli government to attend to boot. Hiding behind the demeanour of a smiley, friendly-looking septuagenarian as Nahala does, behind their spokesperson Daniella Weiss, a fantastic Israeli name as you will have no doubt noticed, belies a level of pure nastiness, superiority and entitlement found nowhere else, where, with a smile on their faces, they cheerfully talk of their dreams of a Gazan beachside property to live in, after all of the Palestinians living there are made to disappear. Because Gaza belongs to Israel. The Palestinians are merely squatters in the way of their divine right to that land, and now seemingly with government assent, since this conference was attended by so many of Benjamin Netanyahu's own Likud Party, not to mention other coalition partners, discussing openly what Western leaders continue to deny. What international law states is illegal is going to happen anyway. Whilst our politicians bury their heads in the sand, nobody prepared to force Israel to obey the law they blatantly will not follow. Right, so yesterday the Nahala settler movement, attended by an array of the worst in Israel's horrendous hard-right coalition government, held a conference, held a rally, whatever you want to call it really, an atrocity, frankly, is what I would call it, called very much on the nose, preparing to resettle Gaza. Not an if, but a when, and they're preparing already, because it's going to happen, you see. And with so many government figures in attendance, this is absolutely the position of the Israeli government too. And we are, of course, seeing this happening already. The exterminations going on in the north of Gaza right now. The 3 hospitals there, Kamal Adwan, Al Auda and the Indonesian hospital, being denied supplies. Medics there not even being able to feed themselves anymore as a total aid shutdown continues there. And now it's being reported that even UNRWA workers in the area are also now unable to feed themselves. The very people who deliver the aid can now no longer get enough aid to sustain themselves. And again, as we've seen in Lebanon and with UNIFIL, Israel here are targeting UN workers themselves again, and still nothing changes politically. Still no pressure is levied on Israel to obey international humanitarian law. Instead, far too many of Israel's politicians are at this rally, where right-wing Israeli settlers who believe the land of Palestine has no right to exist, that it is all theirs by divine right, even though most of them don't possess a scrote of DNA to back up any of their lies about and ties to that land at all. Settler very much the operative word, and it's pretty obvious to most of us by now that that is the case, since they are a remarkably white country in amongst all those Arab peoples living around them, not least the Palestinian people themselves, for whom DNA is very much on their side. Israel is a creation of colonialism and imperialist nonsense from the West. That's why so many people who live there are white. It is an historic mess getting ever larger by their own actions and those who insist on supporting them, be that be because they subscribe to the nonsense ideology of Zionism, or they've been bought and paid for. And nothing quite sums up anything like that, quite like the sweet-faced little old lady who fronts the Nahala movement. But don't let her friendly face fool you, she's off the grid. Daniela Weiss, 79 years of age now, and when you listen to her words you realise that everything Israel has done over the last year has never been about getting Hamas, never been about rescuing their own hostages. It's always been about a land grab. And if they hadn't been acquiesced to by the rest of the world's leaders, far too many of them in the West at least, then they wouldn't be so emboldened as to not just speak out as vocally and openly about what their plans are, but expand upon them now by talking up the idea of a greater Israel now, requiring much further widespread conquest. Conquest that will only lead to greater levels of warfare, involving too much of the rest of the world. Weiss stood up at one point to address the crowd who had attended and said, "We came here with one clear purpose. The purpose is to settle the entire Gaza Strip. Not just part of it, not just a few settlements, the entire Gaza Strip, from north to south. There are representatives here of 6 groups with more than 700 families. That is thousands of people who are ready to move to Gaza now. As a result of the brutal massacre of the 7th of October, the Gaza Arabs have lost their right to be here ever. So they will go to different countries around the world. They will not stay here. The world is still hesitating, but we will convince them in different ways. We'll convince the world." Oh, you will you? She is completely deranged, and anyone listening to her, taking notice of her, lauding her, is just as unbalanced and unhinged. They've lost the right to live in their own land. It's theirs. It's not for you to judge. You've got no right, no moral high ground, especially after 57 years of brutal occupation driving them to legitimately resist that occupation, whether you agree with their methods of doing so or not. And frankly, unless you've lived it, I don't think we can be too quick to necessarily judge them for that. But equally, the world should have stepped in long before now, before things have got so desperate as they have. You have 700 families ready to settle in Gaza now, do you? How about they go back to where they came from? Because chances are, if you're in the settler movement, you've probably gone to Israel from another country yourself anyway. That can't be said of Weiss, I might add. She is Palestinian-born. And I mean Palestinian-born because she predates the state of Israel itself, so of course she is. But her being their figurehead for this Nahala movement, settler movement, is a walking contradiction in terms. Every Arab has lost their right to live in Gaza. Every one of them must go, must disappear. The legitimate legal case for existing where they do is frankly a stronger one than the state of Israel has. The legality of its very existence arguably far more dubious, product of British imperial disaster as it is. Yet Weiss said, watch the Jews go to Gaza and watch the Arabs disappear. But she is just one person, of course. There were plenty of others, and it isn't just older people with delusions like Daniella Weiss lapping all of this up, but multi-generations as well, from old to young. Sky News actually provided some coverage of this story from a younger perspective, but it is still disturbingly familiar in the narrative. And this shows without some kind of international sanction or shift in the power dynamic in Israel, this kind of thinking will continue to pervade, and Israel will continue being an international pariah state for years to come, born from a sense of indoctrinated entitlement. Here's an excerpt. Rashid has come with her friends. She is the daughter of an Israeli soldier who spent months in Gaza and is now fighting in Lebanon. She is friendly, open, eloquent, and utterly sure of herself. So why would you want to live in Gaza? Because it's our homeland, she replies. It says in the Torah that this is our home, this is our land, and we have every right to live there. So many soldiers have died in this. We have to keep doing what they started. They died for a reason. They started something. And I think it's our duty for them and for their families to actually keep doing what they started. They sacrificed themselves for something, so we have to sacrifice ourselves for that thing also. What I ask about the Palestinians who already live in Gaza? What should happen to them? She doesn't miss a beat. We should kill them, every last one of them, and if the government won't do that, then we should just kick them out. This is our land, and we deserve it. It is sociopathic, it is an absolute global travesty, and eternally shameful that so many support this thinking by supporting the state of Israel. By extension, this is what our leadership therefore supports over here in the West, refusing to condemn, refusing to criticise, racing to a podium to support them when they face retaliation. Equally, the same sort of rhetoric has come from the politicians who have attended, though. As you might have expected, Itamar Ben-Gvir was there. These people treat this mad little maniac like a rock star, and he got the crowd going by telling them that we own this land, when you don't, and you never have, and if there is any justice in this world, you never will. One of Netanyahu's own MPs, the chronically awful Tali Gottlieb, opined on what is happening in the north of Gaza at this moment in time, the starvation and the extermination, and she said, we need to occupy the complete land of Israel. There are no innocent people in Gaza. Everybody who has refused to leave the north is a collaborator. Again, we're looking at excuses being made for what are absolutely war crimes, amongst the very worst of actions we've seen from Israel in Gaza, which really is saying something. And even that doesn't go far enough for some. Now, it would be remiss of me to point out, or not point out, that there are indeed Israelis who find Nahala and their rhetoric and that of these politicians offensive in the extreme as well. A counter-demonstration to this rally was also organised. The police, however, kept them cordoned off and kept them well away from the settlers. Sky News, however, also managed to speak to one of them as well. Mikkel Fruchtman bristles with anger. She says she was shocked to see Likud politicians at the event because I think that means the government supports this idea. What they want to do is illegal, and it's going to cause incredible problems. It's going to totally ruin Israel morality if there's any moral shred left, and there are still 101 hostages being held. She looks at the settlers. They look back. It's hard to imagine any common ground between these two camps, any fellow feeling. And from somewhere near, there is a boom, as another shell is launched into Gaza. An uncharacteristic revelation, I thought, there from a mainstream source, though I doubt much of what Sky covered made it past their website, which is where I pulled this story, let alone onto a news bulletin on TV, such is the way it so often works. such as how they justify being so rubbish elsewhere. It's maddening because they clearly are capable of doing proper journalism when they want to. But publishing it to the fullest extent, broadcasting it, well, that always seems to be quite another matter. The hard right of Israeli politics and society are telling us brazenly what they want to do, what they plan to do. And they do it because they fear no repercussions, and their gloating arrogance over it is probably not much of a surprise when there's no sign of them ever being stopped. Not without a dramatic shift in Western governments to rid ourselves of the rotten sellouts to that regime that keep on getting elected here. Of course, beyond Gaza, there is now renewed plans for expansionism as Israel moves ever more into Lebanon, comes into greater conflict with UNIFIL, demands they get out the way despite them being the UN peacekeepers to keep Israel out. It's preparing another attack on Iran as well, and now might even have designs on its usually neutral neighbour of Jordan, because that's a big part of their greater Israel plans now, of course. Neutrality might not be an option for Jordan for much longer, as this video recommendation will tell you all about, as your suggested next watch. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.